Michael had always dreamed of living a life of luxury, one where he never had to worry about money or the endless bills that seemed to haunt him. Life on Earth was tough, and the reality of his situation seemed grim. He worked tirelessly at a job he hated, barely scraping by. Despite all his efforts, it felt like he was going nowhere. Every night, after a long shift, he would sit alone in his small, dimly lit apartment, staring at the flickering screen of his computer, trying to forget the weight of his problems. But tonight was different. Tonight, something changed. As Michael scrolled through the endless pages of job listings, something unusual caught his eye. An email, sent from an unknown address, blinked onto his screen. It was titled simply, "An offer you can't refuse." He hesitated for a moment. The last thing he needed was another scam, but the title intrigued him. He opened it. The message was brief but mysterious. "We have been watching you, Michael. Your desperation is apparent. We have the means to grant you everything you desire: wealth, power, and beauty beyond your imagination. But you must make a choice: your soul in exchange for everything you have ever dreamed of. Accept, and your life will change forever." He laughed nervously, dismissing it as a prank. But as he read the words again, something about them felt real. A chill ran down his spine. He glanced around his apartment, the quiet hum of the lights the only sound in the room. It felt like the walls were closing in on him, and suddenly, he didn't feel so alone. His heart pounded as he leaned closer to the screen. The email continued, "This is no joke, Michael. We are the Shyrics, a race with power beyond your comprehension. You will have riches, love, and power, but at a cost. Your soul is the price we require. Once it is bound to us, you will have everything you ever wanted. You will never need to worry again. The decision is yours." At first, Michael thought it was a joke, but the more he thought about it, the more the idea seemed tempting. Wealth, power, and beautiful alien wives. The very thought of it made his heart race. How could something like this be real? He knew he should be cautious, that there was probably some sinister twist hidden in the message, but the idea of leaving his miserable life behind and stepping into a world of luxury and desire was too appealing. With a trembling hand, he typed a quick response: "I accept." As soon as he hit send, the screen flickered. A strange humming sound filled the room. Before he could react, the room grew colder. Suddenly, a shadow appeared in front of him, an outline of something he couldn't quite comprehend. His heart skipped a beat as he realized he wasn't alone. A figure stepped from the shadows, clad in flowing robes that shimmered with an ethereal glow. The figure's face was partially hidden by a cloak that moved in an unnatural, almost fluid way. The air around the figure felt heavy, like an immense power was radiating from them. "Welcome, Michael," the figure said, their voice both soft and commanding. "The deal has been made." Michael's breath caught in his throat. Was this real? Was he dreaming? The figure stepped closer, revealing a pair of glowing eyes that seemed to pierce straight through him. Michael could feel his pulse quicken, his mind racing with confusion and fear. "I am Shyrics, one of the leaders of my people. You wanted wealth, power, and love. In return for your soul, we will give you everything," Shyrics said, their voice now carrying a weight of finality. Before Michael could speak, the figure raised a hand. The room changed instantly. The apartment disappeared, and he found himself standing on a grand space station, the walls adorned with alien technology. Golden lights shimmered around him, and he could see planets spinning far in the distance through massive windows. It felt like he had been transported to another world entirely, a world of unimaginable luxury. "This is your new life, Michael," Shyrics said, his voice echoing around him. "You will never want for anything again. All that you desire will be yours." Michael looked around in awe. Lush, luxurious rooms. Endless wealth in the form of alien currency floating in holographic displays. He could hear the faint hum of advanced machines at work, serving him in ways that were beyond his comprehension. This was the dream he had always longed for. But deep down, a nagging thought gnawed at him, the unsettling feeling that something was wrong. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the entrance of two figures. The doors slid open, and in stepped two stunningly beautiful women. They were alien in appearance, yet their features resembled something human, their skin shimmering in the light, a color that was a beautiful mix of blue and silver. They were graceful, each with an aura of power and elegance that was unlike anything Michael had ever witnessed. Their eyes met his, and for a moment he felt himself being drawn to them. "These are your wives, Michael," Shirix said. "Tessa and Lyra. They will be your devoted partners, just as you will be their master. This is your new life." The two women approached him, their graceful steps echoing through the grand chamber. Tessa, the taller one, had a cold, calculating gaze, while Lyra, shorter but more fiery, looked at him with a passion that burned bright. They were perfect in every way, and Michael could feel a strange connection to them, as if he had always known them. "Welcome, my lord," Tessa said, her voice smooth and alluring. "We've been waiting for you," Lyra added, her tone warm and inviting. For a moment, Michael was mesmerized. Everything he had ever dreamed of was now in front of him. He was rich. He had beautiful wives. The world, or rather the universe, was his to conquer. But as the shadows from the dark corners of his mind grew longer, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this deal than met the eye. Something felt wrong, but the temptation of his newfound life was overwhelming. He told himself that everything was fine, that he was living the dream. But deep down, Michael knew that the cost of his soul might be more than he had bargained for. The days that followed Michael's agreement with the Shirix were unlike anything he could have ever imagined. Gone were the days of worrying about rent or bills. No longer did he need to work tirelessly in a job he hated just to scrape by. His new life was everything he had ever dreamed of. And more. Every moment was filled with luxury, power, and the devotion of two stunning alien women. He spent his days exploring the massive space station, which seemed more like a floating palace than anything else. The walls were made of a sleek, silver material that glowed softly in the light. Holographic displays flashed all around him, offering an endless supply of wealth in the form of alien currency. Every hologram was tailored to his desires, showing him exotic planets, beautiful alien technology, and offers for luxurious experiences. He could buy anything he wanted, no questions asked, no limits. But it wasn't just the wealth that filled his days. It was the women, Tessa and Lyra, who kept him company. They were beautiful, graceful, and otherworldly, and Michael found himself drawn to them in a way he never thought possible. They would often come to him, offering affection and companionship, but there was something else beneath their beauty. Michael couldn't quite put his finger on it, but unease lingered at the edges of his mind. Like a whisper he couldn't hear clearly. He pushed the feeling aside, telling himself that it was all part of the deal, and that everything was just as it should be. Tessa, the taller of the two women, was the more reserved one. She would often speak to him in soft, calculated tones, as if everything was part of some grand design. She would shower him with praise and affection, yet there was something distant in her gaze, something cold. She spoke of the Shirix with reverence, always hinting that their race was far superior to anything he had ever known. At times, her words were laced with mysterious undertones, as if she knew things Michael didn't, and maybe didn't want to know. Lyra, on the other hand, was more passionate. Her fiery red skin shimmered like molten lava, and her green eyes sparkled with energy. She would often pull Michael into deep conversations about the Shirix and their plans for the universe, talking excitedly about their vast empire and their unmatched power. She seemed genuinely interested in Michael, and he couldn't help but be drawn to her. Her touch was intoxicating, her laughter a melody that made him feel alive in a way he had never felt before. In the beginning, Michael couldn't have been happier. The alien wives were everything he had ever desired. Beautiful, powerful, and attentive. He would spend his days lounging in his luxurious chambers, drinking fine alien wines, and listening to the sweet music of distant galaxies. He had everything he could ever want: gold and jewels, futuristic technology, and the constant companionship of two perfect women. But the strange feeling he had experienced on the night he signed the deal never quite went away. There were moments when he would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, feeling the cold chill run through him. The space station, though beautiful, felt empty at times, as if something was missing. The whispers of the Xerics constantly echoed in the back of his mind. He would hear them speak of power, of the conquest of galaxies, and of their eternal rule. It was clear they were more than just an alien race. They were a force, an unstoppable power with control over everything and everyone. Despite all this, Michael pushed the thoughts away. His life was perfect, wasn't it? The wealth, the beauty, the power, it was all his now. He was no longer the desperate man who had sold his soul for a better life. He had everything, and that should have been enough. One evening, as he sat in his opulent quarters, a familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Tessa, her tall figure appearing in the doorway. She stood there for a moment, watching him with those calculating eyes. "Michael," she said softly, "I hope you're enjoying your new life." He looked up from his seat, smiling at her. "It's everything I've ever dreamed of," he replied. "I never thought it would be like this." Tessa's expression softened, though there was still something cold in her gaze. She walked toward him, her steps elegant and sure, and sat down beside him. "You've made a wise choice," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The Xerics are the most advanced civilization in the galaxy. Your soul will be well taken care of." Michael nodded, still trying to ignore the lingering doubts. "I trust you," he said, though deep down, he wasn't entirely sure why. There was a strange sense of detachment in Tessa's words, as if she wasn't speaking to him like a lover, but more like a master giving orders to a servant. Tessa smiled, though the expression didn't quite reach her eyes. "You'll come to understand, Michael. You were meant for this. You were meant to serve the Xerics, just as we serve you." The words sent a chill down Michael's spine, but before he could react, Lyra entered the room, her fiery presence immediately lifting the mood. She smiled at Michael, her green eyes sparkling with warmth and affection. "You've been too serious, Tessa," Lyra teased. "Michael is happy. We are happy." Tessa's lips curled into a faint smile, but it was the kind of smile that seemed more like a mask than anything genuine. She stood up, giving Michael a final glance. "I'll leave you to enjoy your time together," she said, her voice cold and distant once more. As Tessa left the room, Michael's heart began to race. The conversation with her had unsettled him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he wasn't being told. But when he turned to Lyra, her smile was all he needed to push those thoughts aside. She came to him, her touch warm and inviting, and for a moment, everything felt perfect again. But deep down, Michael knew that something wasn't right. His mind kept drifting back to those mysterious words Tessa had spoken. You were meant to serve the Xerics. What did that mean? And what had he really signed up for when he sold his soul for wealth and beauty? For the first time, he wondered if there was a price that was more than just his soul, something far worse than he could have ever imagined. The doubts that Michael had ignored for so long began to grow louder. At first, it was just a nagging feeling at the back of his mind, a fleeting thought that would disappear as quickly as it came. But now, the whispers of uncertainty were impossible to shake off. His new life was perfect, or so he had convinced himself, but he couldn't help but wonder if it had been too perfect. Was there a hidden cost? What had he truly given up when he made that dark deal with the Xerics? Tessa's words echoed in his mind. You were meant to serve the Xerics, just as we serve you. Michael had brushed them off as a casual remark, but now they seemed to carry a weight far heavier than he had realized. What did it mean to serve the Xerics? He had given his soul for wealth, beauty, and power, but had he also sold his freedom? One evening, As he sat alone in his lavish quarters, Michael couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in his chest any longer. He needed answers. The space station that had once seemed like a paradise now felt cold, almost suffocating. The advanced technology that once fascinated him now seemed like a trap, an elaborate prison made of shimmering walls and glowing holograms. As if on cue, Tessa appeared at the door again, her tall, slender form silhouetted against the bright lights of the corridor. Michael looked up, trying to mask the growing unease he felt, but he couldn't hide the tension in his voice. "Tessa," he said, his tone cautious, "I need to understand something." Tessa entered without a word and sat down across from him, her piercing gaze never leaving his face. "What is it you need to understand, Michael?" Her voice was calm, controlled, but there was an edge to it, something that made Michael uneasy. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to phrase his question. "What did I really sell? What did I give up when I made the deal with the Gyrics? I feel like there's something I'm missing. Something important." Tessa's lips curled into a faint smile, though it was far from reassuring. "You sold your soul, Michael. That is the price of wealth, beauty, and power. The Gyrics are not in the habit of giving gifts without expecting something in return." Her words were measured, almost rehearsed, as if she had said them countless times before. Michael felt a cold chill run down his spine. "But I'm free, right? I can do whatever I want. I have everything I could ever need." He tried to convince himself, but the words sounded hollow even as he spoke them. Tessa's smile faded, and her eyes grew colder. "Do you really believe that, Michael?" she asked softly, her voice almost a whisper. "The Gyrics don't give anything without taking, and the cost of your soul, it's not something that can be measured in simple terms like wealth. You've given more than you realize." Michael swallowed hard, a sinking feeling settling in his stomach. "What do you mean? What else have I given?" Tessa leaned forward, her gaze intense. "When you sold your soul, Michael, you also sold your future. You are bound to the Gyrics now. Your destiny is no longer your own. You will serve them, whether you want to or not." The words hit Michael like a punch to the gut. His mind raced, trying to process the weight of what Tessa had just said. He had never truly understood the gravity of his decision. In his desperation for wealth, power, and the company of beautiful alien women, he had failed to see the bigger picture. He had been blinded by his desires and had signed away his freedom without truly understanding what it meant. He stood up abruptly, pacing the room as the reality of his situation sank in. "But I didn't sign up for this," he muttered under his breath. "I wanted a better life, not to be a slave to some alien empire." Tessa watched him carefully, her expression unreadable. "No one ever truly understands the cost of their choices until it's too late," she said, her voice almost sorrowful. "But you're already bound, Michael. You can't escape what you've agreed to. Not now, not ever." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of finality. Michael's heart pounded in his chest as he tried to grasp the full scope of what Tessa was saying. He had thought that he was in control of his fate, that he had made a deal that would give him everything he wanted. But now he realized that he had traded his soul for something that would tie him to the Gyrics forever. "Is there no way out?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He didn't know if he was asking Tessa or himself. Deep down, he knew the answer before she even spoke. "No," she said simply, her gaze unwavering. "There is no way out. Not unless the Gyrics decide to release you. But that is highly unlikely. You belong to them now." Michael felt the walls closing in around him. The life he had once dreamed of now felt like a gilded cage. He had everything he could ever want, but he had lost something far more precious, his freedom. As the silence stretched between them, Michael could feel the weight of his decision bearing down on him. He had been so blinded by his desires, so eager for wealth and pleasure, that he had failed to see the true cost of the deal. The Gyrics had played him, using his greed and ambition to trap him in their web. And now it was too late to turn back. Tessa's voice broke the silence, cold and calm. "You will serve the Xerics, Michael. It is your destiny. But remember, your soul belongs to them. Everything you do, every step you take, will be for them." Michael's chest tightened as he realized the full extent of his mistake. He had believed that he was in control, but in reality, he had never been free. He had sold his soul for a life of wealth and luxury, but now he was trapped in a never-ending cycle of servitude. But as he stood there, lost in thought, something inside him stirred. Despite the heaviness of his fate, there was a part of him that refused to give in. He wasn't ready to accept that this was the end of his story. There had to be a way out, a way to regain control of his destiny. The question was, would he be strong enough to find it? Michael sat alone in his room, the weight of Tessa's words still hanging heavy in the air. His mind was racing, his thoughts spinning in a whirlwind of fear, anger, and desperation. He had always been able to control his fate. At least, that's what he had told himself. But now, after selling his soul to the Xerics, it felt like everything he had worked for, everything he had built, was slipping away. He had made the mistake of letting desire and greed cloud his judgment. And now he was bound to the Xerics for the rest of his life. But Michael wasn't ready to give up yet. Something inside him refused to accept that this was his fate. He had always been a fighter, always found a way to overcome the odds. And even though he had made a terrible decision, even though he had sold his soul, he still believed there had to be a way out. The Xerics were powerful, yes, but they weren't invincible. They had made a deal with him, but Michael wasn't just going to sit back and accept the life they had planned for him. The days that followed were filled with a growing sense of urgency. Michael began to look for weaknesses, cracks in the Xerics' control over him. He spent hours in his room, poring over everything he could find on the Xerics, on their technology, their customs, their weaknesses. He was determined to find a way to break free, even if it meant going up against the very beings who had given him everything he thought he wanted. It wasn't easy. The Xerics were advanced, their technology far beyond anything Earth had ever seen. They had cloaking devices, AI systems that could predict human behavior, and weapons capable of annihilating entire planets. But Michael had something the Xerics didn't: determination. And as he delved deeper into their systems, he began to see glimpses of opportunities. He found something, a potential vulnerability in their defense network. It was small, almost insignificant, but it was enough for Michael to latch onto. He couldn't do this alone. He knew that. The Xerics had been controlling every aspect of his life, and they had spies everywhere. If he was going to escape, he needed help. That's when he remembered Tessa. She had been cold and distant lately, but Michael had sensed that there was more to her than met the eye. She had been at the center of the deal, the one who had brought him into the Xerics' fold, and though she had made it clear that he was bound to them, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that she might be his ticket to freedom. He reached out to her in the dead of night, when the ship was quieter, when most of the Xerics were asleep. He knew he had to be careful. If the Xerics found out what he was planning, it could be the end for him. But his desperation drove him to take risks. Tessa arrived in his quarters, her usual calm demeanor masking the curiosity she felt. She didn't say a word as she entered, but Michael could tell that she was waiting for him to speak first. "Tessa," Michael began, his voice steady, though his heart was pounding. "I need your help. I know you're not exactly thrilled with my decision to make this deal, but I have to get out of here. I can't live like this." Tessa raised an eyebrow, but remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "I've been thinking," Michael said, pacing back and forth. "There has to be a way to escape. The Xerics might have bound me to them, but I'm not their prisoner forever. I'm not going to let them control me like this. I need you to help me break free." Tessa studied him carefully, her eyes flicking to his face, analyzing every word he said. For a moment, Michael wondered if he had made a huge mistake by confiding in her. She had been so detached, so cold ever since they had made the deal. But to his surprise, after a long pause, she finally spoke. "I knew you would come to this conclusion sooner or later," she said, her voice low but steady. I've seen it before. Humans who think they can control their fate, that they can escape the chains they've put on themselves. But you're right about one thing. The Xerics are not invincible. I can help you, but it won't be easy. Michael's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected her to agree so easily, but there was something in her voice, something in her eyes, that made him believe she was being sincere. I don't care what it takes, Michael said urgently. I'll do whatever it takes to get out of here. I can't stay. The longer I stay, the more I lose my humanity. Please, Tessa, help me. Tessa's face softened just a fraction. She nodded, though it was clear that she had a plan of her own. Okay, she said, I'll help you. But there are risks. The Xerics are always watching. If they suspect anything, we'll be dead before we even have a chance to act. You'll have to trust me completely. Michael didn't hesitate. I trust you. Tessa's eyes narrowed, as if weighing his words carefully. Then, without another word, she began to explain her plan. We need to disrupt their network, she said, her voice steady but low. There's a weakness in their security system. It's not much, but it's enough to give us a window to escape. If we can cut off their communication with the rest of the fleet, we can get to the escape pods and leave this station. But we'll have to act quickly. Once we do this, the Xerics will know we've betrayed them. There's no going back after that. Michael listened intently, absorbing every detail of Tessa's plan. He knew it wasn't going to be easy, and the risks were enormous. But he couldn't stay here. He couldn't live this life any longer, not with the Xerics controlling every move he made. I'm in, Michael said firmly, determination flooding through him. Let's do it. The plan was set in motion. Over the next few days, Michael and Tessa worked in secret, gathering the necessary tools and resources to carry out their escape. They knew that the Xerics' monitoring systems were sophisticated, and one wrong move could expose everything. But they were careful, taking every precaution to remain undetected. As the day of their escape approached, Michael felt a growing sense of anticipation. For the first time since making that fateful deal, he felt a flicker of hope. He had a chance to regain control of his life, to break free from the chains that the Xerics had placed on him. And he wasn't going to let anything stand in his way. The plan was risky, but it was their only shot. Now, it was up to Michael to decide if he was willing to risk everything for the chance at freedom. Would he be able to escape the Xerics' grip, or would he pay the ultimate price for his rebellion? Only time would tell. The escape plan was in motion, but Michael could feel the tension in the air. Every minute, every second felt like it could be his last. Tessa had assured him that the Xerics wouldn't expect a direct assault on their security systems, but he didn't share her confidence. The Xerics were known for their intelligence, and their ability to predict human behavior was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. This wasn't going to be a simple getaway. It was a fight for survival. The night before they were supposed to make their move, Michael couldn't sleep. His mind raced with thoughts of what might happen if they failed. The consequences were too dire to even imagine. If they got caught, he'd never see the light of day again. The Xerics were brutal, and their punishment for betrayal was swift and unforgiving. He had already sold his soul for riches and alien wives. Now he was putting everything on the line for freedom. At the same time, a strange feeling of resolve filled him. His mind kept going back to the one thing that kept him going: humanity's future. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that this wasn't just about his freedom. It was about the future of Earth and its people. The Xerics had been taking advantage of humanity for far too long. They had manipulated humans into trading their souls for promises of wealth and power. They had treated humanity as nothing more than pawns in their grand scheme. But Michael was different. He wasn't just going to roll over and accept their domination. He had seen what humanity was capable of, how they could fight, adapt, and overcome any challenge. The Xerics might have been technologically advanced, but there was one thing they didn't understand: the human spirit. That was what had made him the perfect candidate for the deal with the Xerics in the first place. He had a strength, a resilience that no alien could predict. And now he was going to use that to fight back, not just for his own life, but for all of humanity. The escape wouldn't be easy. They had to reach the Jyrix's central command center, a heavily fortified part of their station. From there, they would cut off the Jyrix's ability to communicate with their fleet. Once that was done, they would have a brief window of time to access the escape pods. But the moment they made their move, they would be hunted. The Jyrix didn't take betrayal lightly, and the punishment for it was severe. Michael knew that if they failed, it would mean the end not just for him, but for Tessa too. They met one last time in the shadows of the station's lower levels. The Jyrix's elite guards patrolled the upper floors, but the lower levels were less secure. Tessa was calm as always, her cool demeanor hiding the intensity of what they were about to do. She had told Michael that she had helped orchestrate escapes like this before, but he could see the worry in her eyes. She was just as aware of the stakes as he was. "You ready?" Tessa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael gave a tight nod. "I'm ready. Let's do this." They moved quickly, using the cloaking technology that Tessa had managed to steal from the Jyrix's storage rooms. The cloaking devices would keep them hidden from the guards, allowing them to move unnoticed through the station. Every step felt like it could be their last. As they made their way toward the command center, Michael's heart pounded in his chest. He could hear his breath, heavy and ragged, in his ears, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the mission ahead. They'd reached the central control room without incident. The door was heavily reinforced, but Tessa had already hacked into the station's security system, using the knowledge she had gained from her time with the Jyrix. She bypassed the security protocols and opened the door. Inside, the room was filled with advanced technology, holographic displays, and control panels. It was unlike anything Michael had ever seen. He had no idea how Tessa had learned to navigate it all, but he didn't question it. They had no time to waste. Tessa began working quickly, her hands moving across the console with precision. Michael stood guard, his eyes scanning the room for any signs of danger. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was it. This was their chance to take down the Jyrix and escape. "Almost there," Tessa muttered, her voice calm but tinged with urgency. Michael's heart skipped a beat as he heard the sound of footsteps approaching. He turned, his eyes darting to the door. The guards were getting closer. They had to move fast. "Come on, Tessa," Michael urged, his voice low. "We don't have much time." Tessa's fingers flew over the console, her brow furrowing as she worked. "I'm in. I just need a few more seconds." Michael watched the door, his pulse racing. The footsteps were getting louder. They couldn't afford to be caught now. Suddenly, a loud beep echoed through the room. Michael's heart sank. The security breach alarm had gone off. The Jyrix knew they were here. "We've been compromised," Tessa said, her voice sharp with panic. "They're onto us." Michael's mind raced. They had to act fast, or they would be trapped. He pulled out a small device from his pocket, a jammer he had stolen earlier from one of the Jyrix's supply rooms. He threw it toward the door. A burst of static filled the air as the jammer activated, disabling the station's sensors and blocking the guards' communication signals. The door opened, and the guards were already on their way in. But they didn't see Michael and Tessa. The cloaking devices had worked. For a moment, they were invisible to the enemy. "Now," Michael hissed. Tessa hit the final button on the console. The Jyrix's communications were severed, and the escape pods were now accessible. But it wasn't enough. They still had to get to the pods, and that meant fighting their way out. The Jyrix guards finally realized that something was wrong, and chaos erupted in the hallway outside. Michael grabbed Tessa's arm, pulling her toward the exit. The cloaking devices were beginning to fail. He could feel the energy running low, but they didn't have time to worry about that. They needed to move. The sound of blaster fire echoed through the station as the Jyrix guards realized they had been infiltrated. The battle for humanity's future had begun. As Michael and Tessa ran through the corridors, the world around them seemed to blur. The only thing that mattered now was survival. The Xerics had already lost their advantage. They couldn't communicate with their fleet, and their guards were scattered, disoriented. But they would regroup, and when they did, Michael knew they would be relentless. The escape pods were just ahead, but the hallway was blocked by a group of Xeric soldiers. Michael's heart raced as they raised their weapons, preparing to open fire. But before they could, Tessa threw a grenade, a small EMP device, down the hallway. The explosion sent a shockwave through the station, temporarily disabling the Xeric's weapons and giving them the opening they needed. Without a word, Michael and Tessa sprinted past the guards, reaching the escape pods just in time. They didn't stop to look back. They didn't need to. They had made it. But the battle wasn't over. Not yet. As the escape pods launched into space, Michael couldn't help but think about the future. The Xerics might have been powerful, but they had underestimated humanity. Michael had fought for his freedom, and for humanity's future, and for the first time, he felt like he had made a difference. The battle for humanity's future had only just begun. The escape pods shot through space, the cold vacuum of the void pressing against them as the Xeric station became a speck in the distance. The harsh reality of their situation settled in. The battle was far from over. They had escaped, but the threat of the Xerics was still looming. The galaxy was vast, and their enemies had more resources than they could ever imagine. Michael knew that the real war had just begun. Tessa sat beside him, her eyes focused on the blinking console. She was working quickly, scanning for any signs of Xeric's pursuit. Michael could tell she was worried, but she didn't show it. She was always composed, always in control. But he had seen the fear in her eyes when they were cornered in the command room. She knew the stakes. If they didn't act fast, their lives, and the future of humanity, could be lost. "We need to get to the outer rim," Tessa said, breaking the silence. "There's a planet there, far from the Xeric's reach. We'll be safe for a while." Michael nodded, the weight of everything pressing down on him. As the pod sped through space, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The Xerics were relentless, and it wouldn't be long before they found a way to track them. But for now, they were safe. For now, they had time. His mind wandered back to the deal he had made. The decision to sell his soul for wealth and alien wives seemed so distant now, as if it had happened to someone else. He had been blinded by greed, by the desire for power. He had wanted to escape the humdrum of his life, to rise above the poverty that had always held him down. And the Xerics had given him that opportunity, at a price. He had thought he was clever, that he could control the situation. But the moment he had signed that contract, everything had changed. The Xerics had used him. They had taken his soul in exchange for a life of luxury, but it hadn't been freedom. He had been nothing more than a pawn in their game, a tool to further their control over humanity. Now, as he sat in the escape pod, the reality of his choices hit him. He had made a deal with the devil, literally, and he had paid the price. His soul was lost, but he still had the chance to make things right. He wasn't going to let his mistakes define him. The future of humanity was on the line, and he would fight for it. Tessa turned to him, her gaze steady. She seemed to sense his internal struggle, the way his mind was torn between regret and the need to keep going. "You okay?" she asked softly. Michael forced a smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm fine. Just thinking." Tessa nodded, not pushing him further. She knew him well enough to know when he needed space. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. They had been through too much together for there to be any distance now. They were partners, fighting for the same cause. As the pod made its way toward the outer rim, Michael couldn't help but think about the two beautiful alien wives who had been part of his life for so long. They had been a symbol of his success, the prize for his deal with the Xerics. They had been everything he thought he wanted. But now, as he reflected on it, he realized how empty it all was. He had been living a lie, and the truth had come crashing down on him in the most brutal way. His mind flashed back to the first time he had met them, Lyra and Zyla. They were stunningly beautiful, with long, flowing hair and smooth, shimmering skin. They had looked at him like he was their savior, like he was the one who would protect them from the harsh realities of their world. At first, it had been intoxicating. Their affection, their devotion. He had felt powerful, like he was in control of everything. But over time, he had seen the cracks in the facade. Lyra and Zyla weren't free. They were as much prisoners of the Xerics as he had been. They had been promised a life of luxury and power, but in reality they were just pawns in the Xerics' game. They had been used to manipulate him, to keep him in line. And the worst part was that he had let it happen. He had let himself be manipulated, blinded by his own desires. Now, as he sat beside Tessa, the weight of his past mistakes felt crushing. He had sold his soul for wealth and status, and in return, he had gained nothing but empty promises. His wives, his wealth, his power, all of it was a lie. And the Xerics, the ones who had made this deal with him, were the true masters of the galaxy. They had played him like a puppet, and he had danced to their tune. But there was still a chance for redemption. Michael knew that. He wasn't going to let the Xerics win. He wasn't going to let them destroy humanity. They had underestimated him before, but they wouldn't make that mistake again. He had the strength, the resilience to fight back. And with Tessa by his side, he knew they could do it. As the pod neared the outer rim, Michael's thoughts turned to the future. He had to make a choice. He could continue down the path he had started on, seeking power and wealth at any cost. Or he could fight for something greater. He could fight for humanity, for the people who had been oppressed and controlled by the Xerics for so long. He could fight for the chance to make things right. It wasn't going to be easy. The Xerics weren't just going to let him go. They would come after him, after Tessa, after anyone who stood in their way. But Michael wasn't afraid anymore. He had faced worse odds before, and he had survived. He had learned that true strength didn't come from power or wealth. It came from the will to fight for what was right. Tessa's voice broke through his thoughts. "We're almost there." Michael nodded, his resolve solidifying. This was it. This was the moment that would define him. The future of humanity was in its hands, and he was ready to fight for it. As the pod touched down on the surface of the outer rim planet, Michael felt a sense of finality wash over him. He was no longer the man who had sold his soul for wealth. He was no longer the pawn in the Xerics' game. He was a fighter, a warrior, and he was going to make sure humanity had a future. With Tessa by his side, and the knowledge that he had a second chance, Michael stepped out of the pod. The battle for humanity's future was just beginning, and he was ready to face it head-on. The final choice had been made, and redemption, true redemption, was within his grasp.